My name is Amanda, and I've always been the kind of woman who doesn't forget. Not insults, not slights, and definitely not betrayal. So when I tell you I planned this for years, believe me, I meant every single second. It started with a job interview. Nothing special. A mid-sized tech startup looking for a leadership development consultant. They wanted someone with academic and real-world experience. Check and check. I walked in confident, resume in hand, heels clicking like a countdown to war. Then I saw him, Blake Whitmore, the CEO, my former classmate, the guy who used to call me Mandy the man-hater in high school because I dared outscore him in calculus. The guy whose father used to stroll into PTA meetings bragging that he'd never waste money on a daughter's education. According to Mr. Whitmore Sr., girls were meant to marry up, not level up. I smiled as Blake shook my hand. He didn't recognize me. Of course not. To him, women were scenery, temporary, replaceable, forgettable. But I remembered him. Every arrogant word, every smug smirk. "So, Amanda," he said, leaning back in his overpriced leather chair. "Tell me about yourself." I could have told him I had a PhD in organizational psychology, or that I'd published 3 books, or that I'd taught executive leadership at Stanford. But I went with, "I help people like you figure out why their employees hate them." He laughed. That fake kind of laugh people use when they're secretly threatened. He didn't like me, but his company needed me. Badly. Turnover was bleeding them dry. Staff morale was in the gutter. "You're hired," he said after 10 minutes. That fast. I wasn't surprised. Arrogant men like Blake loved the idea of fixing their problems with a pretty consultant. He thought I'd decorate his office and stroke his ego. What he didn't know was that I had no intention of helping him. Not yet. I got to work. But I didn't start with strategies or training. No. I started with his team. I listened. Really listened. People were desperate to talk. Turns out, Blake was even worse than I remembered. He promoted his friends, dismissed ideas from women, gave his brother a 6-figure position with 0 qualifications. The same brother, by the way, whose college tuition Daddy paid in full, while I was working night shifts to afford community college. The same brother who dropped out twice. The same brother who would soon regret ever stepping foot into my world. Because, here's the twist. 6 months before I applied to Blake's company, I joined the university board that managed their executive education program. And guess who enrolled in that program to get promoted to COO? Little brother Whitmore. Guess who got assigned a mandatory ethics course? Guess who was teaching it? Me, and I wasn't done yet. I had a plan. And Blake? He wouldn't see it coming until it was way, way too late. The first day of class was nothing short of delicious. I walked into the sleek, glass-walled executive classroom wearing a black blazer, heels sharp enough to slice through steel, and a smile that could kill a man's confidence. The kind of smile that says, "I already know how this ends." Then he walked in. Chase Whitmore, Blake's little brother. Taller than I remembered. Still dumb as a bag of rocks. Dressed like money had fallen on him but hadn't quite settled. He was glued to his phone until he looked up and saw me. His face? Pure confusion, followed by recognition, then panic. "Amanda?" he stammered. "What are you doing here?" "I'll be your professor for the next 8 weeks, I said, gesturing toward the syllabus on the screen. "We're covering corporate ethics, which, in your case, should be illuminating." Chase laughed awkwardly, like he assumed I was joking. I wasn't. By the end of the first week, he knew I meant business. My standards were brutal. I graded him like a drill sergeant with a grudge. Every shortcut? Flagged. Every copied sentence? Marked in red. He begged for leniency. I gave him office hours. He never showed up. Week 3, he complained to the board. Bad move. You see, I wasn't just his professor. I was on the same board he complained to. I was the reason the university even approved this leadership pipeline for executive promotions. Blake had pulled strings to get his brother in, and I was tightening the noose. Chase tried to rally the other students, but most of them were competent adults with actual jobs. They didn't have time for his tantrums or his obvious attempts to derail class. One woman, CFO of a Fortune 500 company, whispered to me after a particularly painful presentation. "How does someone like that end up in your class?" I smiled. "Family connections. You know how it is." She just rolled her eyes. Week 5, Chase failed his midterm. Not because I was unfair. I'd even offered him an extension. But instead of studying, he spent the weekend partying in Tahoe and forgot to submit the paper. So when I handed him the F, he actually had the audacity to say, "Do you know who my dad is?" That was the moment. The exact moment I knew my plan was working. "Do you know who I am, Chase?" I asked. "Because your father clearly didn't think I'd ever matter. He was wrong. And now you're going to pay for that." He didn't respond. He just stared, pale and sweating. The kind of fear you only see when someone realizes the game is rigged and not in their favor anymore. But it wasn't just Chase I wanted. Oh no. The real prize was still in his corner office. Blake. And by the time I was finished, he'd wish he'd never hired me. The final week of class arrived like a thunderstorm over a dry field. I could practically smell the panic rolling off Chase Whitmore. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Hair a mess, shirt wrinkled, tie knotted like it had been done by a child. He was failing, and he knew it. I gave him one last chance. An optional final project that could raise his grade just enough to pass. Not enough to look good. Just enough not to embarrass the entire Whitmore bloodline. He submitted it 2 days late. Half plagiarized. The other half barely coherent. I didn't even finish reading it. F a big, satisfying, permanent F. When grades were posted, Chase sent me a 3-paragraph email at 2 a.m. It was part apology, part threat, and completely hilarious. He insisted his father would handle this. That Blake would have my job. That no one fails a Whitmore. And just like that, it was time for my final move. I scheduled a private debrief with Blake. He was lounging in his chair when I entered, sipping something expensive, looking like a man who thought he still had control. "Amanda," he said, "look, I heard about Chase. He's a good kid, bit immature. He just needs the right support. Maybe we could figure out—" "No," I cut in. "Calm, cold, surgical. He failed, and if you try to override that grade, the university will conduct a full review of him and of you." His smile cracked slightly. "Are you threatening me?" "Blake," I leaned in, lowering my voice to a venomous whisper. "You remember when your father told mine that girls weren't worth educating? That boys were the investment, and girls were just decoration?" He blinked. Silence. I remember. Every word. I slid a folder across his desk. Inside was a report I'd been compiling over the last few months. Anonymized staff complaints, salary disparities, promotion discrepancies, a pattern of unethical hiring, including Chase's fast-tracked executive pipeline. All sourced. All verified. All ready to go to HR. Or, if needed, the board. He flipped through it with trembling hands. What do you want?" he muttered. I smiled. "Nothing. Just watching you realize that the little girl your daddy dismissed now holds your entire empire by the throat." Then I stood. "Oh, and Blake?" "I've accepted a position as chief people officer. The board voted last night. I'll be overseeing all hiring, training, and leadership development, including yours." He didn't speak. He couldn't. I walked out, heels echoing like gunshots. A week later, Chase's enrollment was quietly revoked. 2 weeks later, Blake stepped down for personal reasons. 3 weeks later, I was leading the company's restructuring plan. My name on the press release. My face in the magazines. And just like that, the boys who had everything handed to them were suddenly learning something new. You never underestimate the woman who remembers, especially when she becomes your professor.